The shattering of illusions the afternoon had begun like so many others since Robert's passing. 3 years had passed since Maggie Sullivan buried her husband, yet time had done nothing to erase the shadow his absence cast. Robert had been steady, reliable, a man of quiet humor and tender gestures. He was the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries without prompting, who brewed her morning tea before she rose, who never once let her doubt that she was loved. When the cancer took him, it wasn't just his body that disappeared from the world, it was Maggie's anchor, her rhythm, her partner in every small ritual of daily life. In the early days of widowhood, silence had been her enemy. The house had echoed with loss, every creak of the hardwood floors a reminder that she was alone. She'd drift from room to room at night, staring at photographs, unable to sleep in the bed they had shared for 4 decades. Michael, her only child, had called daily, his voice steady, practical, but filled with concern. He lived across the city in a condo close to the Marriott where he worked as general manager, yet even his frequent visits couldn't fill the emptiness. Over time, Maggie adapted. She filled the silence with books, with classical music on the radio, with long walks along the Charles River. She joined a widow's grief support group in Cambridge, partly to appease Michael, partly because she hoped being among people who understood would soften the ache. The group met every Thursday evening in the basement of a Methodist church. Folding chairs, styrofoam cups of lukewarm coffee, a box of tissues passed around like communion. It was there, 8 months earlier, that David Patterson had walked into her life. He'd arrived late, apologetic, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. He looked, Maggie thought at the time, like someone out of a novel, handsome, but with an air of melancholy that made him approachable. He introduced himself with a gentle voice and spoke of his wife, lost to cancer 2 years earlier. His story mirrored hers in uncanny ways. The sleepless nights, the way friends grew awkward after the funeral, the hollow rituals of everyday life. Unlike others in the group, David asked about Robert. He wanted to hear stories, to know the man Maggie had loved. He listened with intensity, nodding, sometimes squeezing her hand when her voice broke. In those early conversations, Maggie felt something stir she had thought was gone forever, the warmth of being seen, understood. Their connection grew quietly. Coffee after meetings turned into lunches, then dinners. David was attentive without being overwhelming. He brought flowers, lilies, and tulips, never roses, because he remembered her mentioning that roses reminded her of funerals. He cooked for her in her kitchen, a surprisingly skilled hand at Italian dishes. He met her pace, never pushing for more intimacy than she offered. When they began spending nights together, it felt natural, respectful, as though Robert himself might have approved. By Easter, he had joined her and Michael for dinner. Michael had been polite, professional, but afterward he pulled Maggie aside. "He seems nice, Mom," he'd said, "but be careful." Maggie brushed it off as natural protectiveness. Michael had always been wary of people who got too close too quickly. 8 months later, Maggie believed she had rebuilt a kind of happiness. David stayed over twice a week, leaving a toothbrush in her bathroom, a pair of slippers by the door. He spoke of traveling together, of maybe buying a cottage in Maine someday. She found herself smiling more, humming as she cooked, even daring to imagine a future that wasn't empty. And then came that Tuesday afternoon. The September sun filtered weakly through lace curtains as Maggie settled in her favorite chair, a cup of coffee at her side, and her well-loved copy of Pride and Prejudice in hand. The silence was companionable now, no longer oppressive. Upstairs, water ran steadily. David had been in the shower for 20 minutes. She smiled faintly, amused at his fastidiousness. The phone rang, and Michael's name lit the screen. She answered with a warmth reserved only for him. But his voice was tight, urgent. "Mom, is your boyfriend there?" Maggie blinked. "Yes, he's upstairs showering." "Why?" A pause, then. "That's impossible. I just saw him check into the hotel with another woman." The world tilted. Her hand trembled, nearly spilling the coffee. 8 months of companionship collapsed into doubt in a heartbeat. She looked toward the ceiling, hearing the water still running. Logic said David was upstairs. Yet Michael's calm, authoritative tone, the voice of a man who had managed staff and dealt with liars for 15 years, left no room for disbelief. Before she could reply, before she could even draw a steady breath, footsteps sounded behind her. She turned, pulse hammering. A young woman stood in the doorway, long auburn hair, green eyes wide with shock. She looked like she'd stumbled into the wrong scene of her own life. "Oh my God," the woman whispered, hand flying to her mouth. "You're not supposed to be here." Maggie's mind reeled. The absurdity of the statement almost made her laugh, if not for the dread coiling in her stomach. Excuse me, who are you and what are you doing in my house? Color drained from the woman's face. She glanced toward the stairs, where water still ran, then back at Maggie. David told me this was his house. He gave me a key 3 weeks ago, said I could use it while my apartment was being fumigated. She held up a silver key, identical to the spare Maggie had given David not long ago. Maggie's breath caught. What's your name? She asked, voice surprisingly steady. Sophia Chen. I thought I was his girlfriend. Her voice cracked on the last word. Oh, honey, Maggie said softly, we both thought that. The shower stopped. Silence descended, heavy and electric. Sophia's eyes went wide. Maggie's grip on her phone tightened. The two women stared at each other like deer frozen in headlights. Does he know you know about me? Sophia whispered. Maggie shook her head. And he doesn't know I know about you? Another shake. What do we do? Sophia's whisper was frantic. For the first time since Michael's phone call, Maggie felt something almost like clarity. Her lips curved into a cold, deliberate smile. Poor David, she said softly. He's about to get the surprise of his life. Footsteps descended the stairs. Ladies, what a pleasant surprise, came the smooth baritone, as if nothing in the world were amiss. David appeared at the landing, towel wrapped around his waist, silver hair damp but perfectly arranged. His eyes glided from Maggie to Sophia with practiced ease, his smile polished. Maggie, darling, you're home early? He bent to kiss her cheek. The scent of aftershave, her expensive brand, one he'd been using for months, filled her nostrils. Even his cologne was borrowed. And Sophia, he continued seamlessly, I thought you were staying with your sister this week. Maggie almost admired the performance, almost. Actually, David, she said evenly, Sophia and I have been having the most interesting conversation. His smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Yes, Sophia said, finding her voice. Like how you told me this was your house. And how you gave her a key to my front door, Maggie added. David's towel slipped slightly. He grabbed it, rattled. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked less than certain. There's obviously been some confusion, he said, but his tone had lost its silkiness. Sophia, why don't you head upstairs and let me explain? No, Maggie cut in sharply. Sophia stays. We're going to have this conversation together. His jaw tightened. Maggie, perhaps we should talk privately. Like you privately gave away my spare key? Maggie snapped. Or privately lied about your career. Because my son Michael just called. He saw you check into his hotel with yet another woman. The color drained from David's face. The polished charmer, the grief companion, the attentive suitor, all of it wavered, cracked. How many of us are there, David? Maggie asked quietly. For once he had no smooth answer. His mouth opened, closed. His hands clutched the towel like a shield. The man who always had the perfect words stood silent, caught. Maggie leaned back in her chair, voice calm, cold, resolute. Why don't you start explaining? The man behind the mask, the silence that followed Daniel Morrison's confession, was thick enough to choke on. Maggie sat upright in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the picture of composure. Beside her, Sophia trembled, rage and disbelief flickering across her face like lightning. And there on the settee, towel clutched to his waist, sat the man who had been their comfort, their companion, their David. My name isn't David Patterson, he said again, as if repetition might soften the blow. It's Daniel Morrison. The syllables felt foreign in Maggie's living room, like an intruder's footsteps on sacred ground. Sophia gave a bitter laugh, sharp as glass. Of course it is. Why should anything about you be real? Daniel winced. His hands shook as he ran them through his damp silver hair. I didn't set out to deceive anyone. Please believe me when I say that. My mother, she had Alzheimer's. For 12 years, I was her caregiver. Everything went into her care. The savings, the house, even my health. By the time she passed last year, I had nothing. No job, no home, no family left. For a fleeting moment, Maggie felt a pang of sympathy. She knew how caregiving hollowed people out, how it stripped away dignity and left survivors broken. But the feeling was quickly buried under the mountain of betrayal. You had nothing, Maggie said coldly, so you built yourself a new life on our backs. Is that it? He looked up, desperation in his eyes. At first, I only wanted companionship. I was grieving too. The first woman I met, she invited me in. We helped each other. She was lonely, I was lost. It felt harmless. Harmless? Sophia spat. You lied about your name, your past, your job. You pretended to be someone you're not. That's not harmless, that's fraud. Daniel flinched, his eyes closed. It snowballed, one lie covered another. One woman led to another. I told myself I was offering comfort, stability, love, that they needed me as much as I needed them. Maggie's voice was steady, but her hands dug into the armrest. How many? He hesitated. The seconds stretched unbearable. Finally, he whispered, 7, currently? Sophia gasped. Maggie didn't move. 7. The number echoed in her head like a church bell tolling doom. She was not special, not chosen, merely one of a rotation, a face in a collection. And the woman at Michael's hotel today? Maggie asked. Daniel's mouth tightened. Rebecca Martinez. It was supposed to be our weekend. Sophia let out a sharp sound, half laugh, half sob. So what, you keep a calendar? Monday with Maggie, Tuesday with Sophia, Friday with Rebecca. Do you set reminders so you don't mix up our names in bed? Daniel's face crumpled. I never meant for it to become like this. Maggie leaned forward, her eyes, usually soft, now cut like steel. What did you mean it to be, Daniel? A free ride? A comfortable bed? A stocked refrigerator? Women to dote on you because you played the perfect grieving widower? He opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. No, she said firmly. I'll tell you what you meant it to be. You meant it to be survival at our expense. And you got clever about it, too clever. His eyes flicked toward her in alarm, because Maggie had not been as naive as he thought. 2 weeks earlier, a seed of doubt had been planted. She couldn't even pinpoint what had triggered it. Maybe the way he sidestepped questions about his so-called financial career, or the inconsistency in his stories about childhood. Whatever it was, Maggie had learned long ago from Robert that when something gnawed at your gut, you investigated. Quietly, thoroughly. She had called her friend Ellen, whose nephew worked as a private investigator. Discreetly, she hired him to look into David Patterson. The file had arrived 2 days ago, sealed in a manila envelope. Maggie had tucked it away in her dresser, intending to confront him when the moment was right. Now she rose and left the room without a word. She returned with the envelope, placed it on the coffee table, and slid it toward him. Daniel's face drained of color. You thought you were clever, Maggie said softly, but you left footprints everywhere. Bank accounts drained, women's savings disappearing in trickles, not just companionship, Daniel, theft. Sophia's head snapped toward him. You stole from us? I borrowed, he whispered, but his voice shook. I meant to pay it back. Maggie's laugh was sharp and humorless. With what? The salary from your imaginary investment firm? Sophia rose to her feet, fists clenched. You bastard. I let you into my life, into my home. I trusted you. Daniel reached out, but she recoiled. Sophia, please. Don't touch me, she hissed. The weight of his double life pressed down on the room. Every lie, every stolen moment, every fabricated detail was laid bare. For Maggie, it was oddly clarifying. The man before her was not her companion, her second chance, her safe harbor. He was a survivor, yes, but a predator too, who had woven grief into a net to catch women like her. Still, Maggie's mind was sharp, calculating. Rage alone would not undo what had been done. Action was required. She looked at Sophia, whose tears streaked down her cheeks. She thought of Rebecca, unknowingly checking into a hotel that day, believing she was the only one. She thought of the others, the faceless widows scattered across the city, each thinking they had found love. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but commanding. This ends now, not just for me, not just for Sophia, but for all of us. Daniel looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? I mean, Maggie said, we're going to gather the women, all 7, and you're going to face what you've done. Sophia wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Yes, he doesn't get to slither away to the next lonely widow. He needs to be exposed. Daniel shook his head violently. No, you can't, you don't understand. Oh, we understand perfectly, Maggie cut in. Her voice carried the force of years spent weathering storms, of a widow who had faced death and come out alive. You thought you were clever, but now you're going to learn what happens when women stop being your victims and start being your judges. The room went still. Daniel's eyes darted from one woman to the other, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. And in that moment, Maggie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not loneliness, not even betrayal, but power. The circle of truth. Maggie had never believed in fate, not really. Robert used to tease her about it, claiming the universe nudged people into each other's paths when they needed it most. She had always laughed and called it coincidence. But now, as she sat in her kitchen with Sophia Chen, her unexpected ally in betrayal, Maggie wondered if Robert might have been right. Because out of all the women Daniel Morrison had deceived, fate had brought her and Sophia together first. The kitchen table between them was cluttered. A pot of coffee, 2 mugs half empty, Maggie's notes scribbled across legal pads, and the manila folder from the private investigator. Outside, dusk settled over Cambridge, the orange glow of street lamps flickering to life. Inside, the air pulsed with urgency. We need to find the others, Sophia said firmly. Her voice trembled, but her determination was unmistakable. He doesn't get to keep doing this. We're not his victims, we're his undoing. Maggie nodded slowly. The resolve she felt was almost frightening in its intensity. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about justice. About reclaiming dignity stolen by a man who had fed on their loneliness. The private investigator's file gave them a starting point. Bank records showed strange transfers between accounts. A background search revealed multiple aliases: David Patterson, Daniel Morris, even a Dan Peters. Each alias tied to different addresses across Boston, Somerville, Quincy. Patterns emerged: short-term stays, bills in other people's names, accounts quietly emptied over time. There were names, too. 7 women scattered across the city. Some details were vague, some only half confirmed, but it was enough. Sophia tapped the page with a pen. Rebecca Martinez, she's the one from the hotel today. We should start with her. Maggie agreed. Rebecca deserved to know before Daniel wove another lie. That night, the 2 women made calls, drafted emails, and pieced together fragments of lives entwined by deception. It felt almost surreal, like joining a secret sisterhood none of them had asked to join. By the end of the week, they had contacted 5 of the 7. The responses varied: shock, denial, anger, grief. Some refused to believe, clinging to the illusion Daniel had spun for them. Others, like Rebecca, reacted with white-hot fury. "He took $5,000 from me," Rebecca revealed over the phone, her voice cracked with rage. "Said it was a short-term loan. I thought I was helping him get back on his feet. He never paid it back. And all the while he was sleeping with you?" "Not just me," Maggie said quietly. "There are others." Rebecca's silence spoke volumes. Then she exhaled sharply. "Then count me in. Whatever you're planning, I'm there." By the second week, 6 of the 7 had agreed to meet. Only one, an older widow named Lorraine, remained unreachable, her phone disconnected. It didn't matter. 6 was enough. The gathering took place in Maggie's living room, the same space where the truth had first exploded. She arranged chairs in a circle, like the grief support group where she had first met Daniel. The irony wasn't lost on her. One by one, they arrived. Rebecca, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her eyes blazing. Julia, a quiet librarian from Somerville, clutching a notebook like armor. Teresa, elegant in a silk scarf, hiding trembling hands. Anna, younger than the rest, barely 40, with tears she fought to hold back. And finally, Sophia, who had stood with Maggie from the beginning. The room hummed with nervous energy, strangers bound by shared betrayal. Maggie stood. Her voice carried steady authority. "Thank you for coming. I know this is painful, but we deserve to know the truth together." The women nodded. Some avoided each other's eyes. Some stared at the empty chair in the circle, the chair reserved for Daniel. They didn't wait long. At 7 o'clock sharp, Daniel walked in. Maggie had insisted he come, using the only leverage she had, the evidence in her possession. If he refused, she promised, she would take it to the police immediately. He entered with his usual poise, but the weight of 6 women's stares broke through his mask. He looked older, smaller, as if the lies themselves had aged him. "Ladies," he began, forcing a smile. "I know you're angry, I deserve that. But please let me explain." Rebecca shot to her feet. "Explain? You stole from me, you lied to me." Julia's voice trembled. "You told me I was your only one." Anna burst into tears. "I thought you loved me." The words crashed over him like waves, each accusation stripping away the charm he once wielded so effortlessly. He sank into the empty chair, his hands trembling. "I never wanted this," he said hoarsely. "I was drowning after my mother, after the years of caregiving. I had nothing. I was homeless, invisible. Do you know what it's like to walk the streets with nowhere to go, no one to call? When I met the first of you, I thought maybe I could belong again, and then it spread. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to?" Teresa's voice cut like glass. "You crafted lies, you took our money, you invaded our homes, our beds. Don't you dare tell us this wasn't deliberate." The circle tightened around him, not physically, but emotionally. Maggie watched him squirm, watched the cracks widen in his facade. She felt no pity now, only resolve. Because this wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what they would do next. Sophia spoke, her voice steady. "We have choices. We can go to the police, we can go public. Or we can decide together how to handle you." The women exchanged glances. Each of them carried their own wounds, their own reasons for being there. Justice meant different things to each of them. Maggie leaned forward. "This isn't about revenge, it's about truth. We take back our power by refusing to let him silence us anymore." Rebecca's fists clenched. "Then let's make him answer, for every lie, every dollar, every night we spent believing in him." Daniel buried his face in his hands. For the first time, he seemed truly broken. The room filled with the murmur of voices, plans forming, emotions colliding. And in that charged moment, Maggie realized something extraordinary. These women, once strangers, had been forged into a community by betrayal. They weren't victims anymore. They were a chorus of voices, united. But unity was only the beginning. Because what they would do with Daniel Morrison, the decision of justice, forgiveness, or vengeance, was still unwritten. And the night was far from over. Reckoning and resolution, the living room no longer felt like Maggie's. It had transformed into a tribunal, a chamber of truth where 7 women, once strangers, now allies, faced the man who had tried to fracture their lives. The soft lamplight, the framed photos of Robert, the shelves of Austen and Dickens, all stood as silent witnesses to the spectacle unfolding within. Daniel Morrison, Thomas Bradley Hutchinson, as the private investigator's file revealed, sat hunched in his chair, shoulders bowed, hands clasped like a penitent. His towel had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt, but the effect was the same, stripped of pretense, exposed. Maggie sat at the head of the circle, not because she demanded it, but because the others had deferred to her. She had been the first to see through him, the one to gather them, the steady voice guiding fury into focus. "Let's begin," she said. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. Rebecca slammed a folder of bank statements onto the coffee table. "He stole $5,000 from me, promised it was a loan for medical bills. I believed him." Her dark eyes bored into Daniel. "You looked me in the eye and told me I was your future. You took my money and gave it to someone else." Daniel's lips parted, a protest forming, but Maggie raised her hand. "No excuses. Tonight you listen." Next was Julia. She opened her notebook with trembling fingers, reading aloud the promises he had written her. "You are my one safe place. My anchor, my only love." She shut the book with a sharp snap. "I thought those words were mine alone. But you copy-pasted your affection like a template." Teresa leaned forward, her silk scarf slipping slightly. "I watched you charm my grandchildren. I invited you into my family. And while I trusted you with them, you were draining my savings behind my back." Her voice trembled with rage barely contained. Anna's tears finally spilled. "I'm only 41. I thought maybe I was too young to be here, too young to have lost my husband, too young to need someone like you. But you found me anyway. You knew I was vulnerable, and you used me." Sophia, seated beside Maggie, spoke last. Her voice was cold steel. "You walked into my life claiming this house was yours. You gave me a key to Maggie's door. Do you understand how dangerous that was? I lived here, ate here, slept here, believing this was your home. You lied so casually, so convincingly, it scares me to think how far you would have gone." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel looked from one woman to the next, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "I never meant," he started. "Enough," Maggie cut in. She opened the manila folder, laying out documents like evidence in a courtroom. "The truth is simple. Your name is not David Patterson. It is not Daniel Morrison. It is Thomas Bradley Hutchinson. And you are wanted by the FBI for fraud and interstate cons. You've used the identities of the dead to hide your crimes. You've manipulated women across at least 12 states." Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who had expected lies hadn't grasped the depth. "Is that true?" Julia whispered. Daniel's silence confirmed it. "Here's the dilemma," Maggie continued, her voice steady. "We have the power to destroy you right now. The police will be very interested in these documents. The FBI even more so. But before we decide, each woman here deserves a voice in what happens to you." Rebecca's hand shot up first. "Prison. Let him rot." Julia hesitated. "Part of me wants that, but part of me wants to walk away, to forget he ever existed." Teresa shook her head. "Forgetting is too easy. He'll just do it again. He has to be stopped." Anna sobbed quietly. "I don't care what happens to him, I just want my life back." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "We owe it to ourselves and to whoever else he might target to end this." The women looked to Maggie. The weight of decision pressed on her chest like a stone. She had been an English teacher all her life, guiding students through Austen's moral dilemmas, Shakespeare's tragedies, Dickens's justice. But this was no novel. This was her life. And justice had to mean something. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Michael," she said when her son answered, "call your contact at the Boston PD. Tell them we have someone they'll want to meet." Daniel's eyes widened. He lurched forward. "Maggie, please don't. I can make this right. I'll pay it back. All of it. Just give me time." Maggie stood, her voice calm but final. "You've already stolen our time, Thomas. You won't steal our futures, too." The knock at the door came 20 minutes later. 2 plainclothes officers entered, their presence filling the room with a different kind of gravity. The women fell silent as Daniel was handcuffed, his protests dissolving into the quiet shuffle of footsteps on Maggie's hardwood floors. When the door closed behind them, the room remained still. No cheers, no applause. Just the soft sound of collective breathing, the sound of women who had carried the weight of deception finally setting it down. Sophia broke the silence. Now what? Maggie looked around the circle. Faces etched with exhaustion, pain, but also relief. She thought of Robert, of the grief group where it had all begun, of the irony that healing had come not from a man, but from a community of women bound by betrayal. Now, she said softly, we live, we read our books, we laugh at dinners, we remember our worth. And maybe, just maybe, we do it together. Rebecca gave a small, reluctant smile. Julia nodded. Teresa straightened her scarf. Anna wiped her tears. Sophia squeezed Maggie's hand. The circle had begun with grief. It ended with strength. Maggie felt something inside her shift, something that had been stuck since Robert's death. A sense of closure. A recognition that love lost did not mean life lost. That even betrayal could not erase resilience. As the women began to gather their things, exchanging phone numbers, promising to meet again, not as victims but as friends, Maggie stood by the window, watching the police car's taillights fade into the night. Goodbye, Thomas, she whispered. You almost broke us, but instead you built us. And for the first time in 3 years, Margaret Sullivan felt not just like a widow surviving. She felt like a woman living. The women adjusting to life after betrayal. Media attention, since FBI cases don't stay quiet. Public reaction, sympathy, but also shame judgment. Maggie's personal growth, rediscovering purpose, friendship, independence. Sophia's healing and transformation. A reunion dinner of the circle, this time with laughter instead of pain. Hints of new beginnings for Maggie, friendship, community, maybe a spark of romance, but on her own terms. Reflection. Betrayal tried to define them, but resilience redefined them. Section 5. After the fall, the first few days after Thomas Bradley Hutchinson's arrest were a blur. Maggie's house felt unnaturally quiet, as though even the walls were catching their breath after the storm. The police had left with their files, the women had gone home with heavy but lighter hearts, and for the first time in weeks, Maggie was alone. Alone, but not lonely, because something remarkable had happened in that circle. Betrayal had bound them, but choice had united them. The choice to confront, to speak, to act. Still, the consequences rippled outward. The news breaks by Monday morning, the story had hit the local papers. Silver Fox scammer arrested in Cambridge home. FBI confirms fugitive's identity. The article painted a sensational picture. A man who preyed on widows, who used grief groups as his hunting ground, who spun false identities to drain accounts and hearts alike. There was Maggie's name, Sophia's too, mentioned as the women who had uncovered the truth. Maggie read it over coffee at her kitchen table, her glasses slipping down her nose. The words felt surreal. To see her life summarized in ink for strangers to devour was unsettling. She wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or violated. The phone began to ring. Old friends, neighbors, even former students called. Some offered sympathy. Others couldn't resist the gossip. Maggie, I had no idea. Maggie, how brave of you. Maggie, I always said you had a good head on your shoulders. She thanked them politely, but each call left her weary. Because beneath the sympathy lay an unspoken question. How could you not have known? But Maggie refused to carry shame. She had believed because she had chosen hope over despair. That was no crime. The women find their voices. Sophia visited often. She brought pastries from a bakery near her apartment, insisting that sugar was the best cure for emotional bruises. Together, they began reaching out to the other women again, not to relive the pain, but to build something new. Rebecca, who had once been all fire and fury, surprised them with her resilience. She filed formal charges, worked with investigators, and even gave a fiery interview on the evening news. We are not weak, she declared to the camera. We are not gullible, we are human. And loneliness does not make us prey, it makes us strong enough to seek connection. Julia started writing. Pages upon pages filled her notebooks, part diary, part memoir, part warning for others. She read excerpts to the group one evening, her voice quivering but proud. Teresa began hosting dinners. Her dining room, once silent after her husband's death, filled again with chatter and clinking glasses. She said it was the first time she'd felt alive in years. Anna, the youngest, started therapy. I don't want this to define me, she admitted, but I also don't want to bury it. And Sophia, who had been the accidental witness in Maggie's living room, transformed the most. She cut her auburn hair short, started a new job, and laughed more freely than Maggie had ever seen. They were healing, each in their own way. Maggie's quiet revolution for Maggie, healing came in quieter forms. She returned to her reading chair with pride and prejudice, and discovered that for the first time in months, She could lose herself in Austen's words without the shadow of David, Thomas, lingering in her thoughts. She joined a book club at the local library, not to teach but to listen, to share, to connect. To her surprise, she found herself laughing at small things again. And slowly she began to write. Not letters, not diaries, but stories. About grief, about betrayal, about women who found strength in one another when the world tried to make them small. She didn't know if anyone would ever read them, but writing them felt like planting seeds. The dinner of 7, 3 months after the arrest, Maggie hosted again. But this time, it wasn't for confrontation. It was for celebration. The same dining table that had once borne witness to fury and shame now gleamed with candles, flowers, and Maggie's best china. 7 places set not for victims but for survivors. They arrived one by one, bringing dishes, laughter, and stories. They toasted not to Thomas's downfall but to their own rebirth. Rebecca raised her glass. To us, the Silver Fox Survivors Club. Everyone laughed, the name ridiculous and perfect. Maggie looked around the table, her heart swelling. Eleanor, Julia, Teresa, Anna, Rebecca, Sophia, and herself. 7 women who had walked into the fire and emerged not just intact but stronger. For the first time since Robert's death, Maggie felt something like joy. A new chapter late that night. After the dishes were cleared and the laughter faded, Maggie stood alone at the window, gazing out at the quiet street. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. She thought of Robert, of the life they'd shared, of the grief that had once hollowed her. She thought of Thomas, the man who had nearly broken her. And then she thought of the women, her unexpected sisters, who had helped her rebuild. Life, she realized, was not about the betrayals we suffered, but about the strength we discovered in their wake. Maggie smiled to herself. She was no longer just a widow surviving. She was a woman living, writing, leading, laughing. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready, not for another man, not for another love story, but for her own. Because this, she knew, was only the beginning.